Yeah, हो गया.
हो गया?
हो गया.
Don't need help.
No. Hi, Suhit, are you there?
Mute it, mute it.
Hi, Anjali.
Are you starting or you want me to start?
I'll welcome you and everyone else. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us today for our second virtual Cappuccino Adda Poetry Festival, which marks the 7th anniversary of Cappuccino Adda that started as the Cappuccino readings 7 years ago. And of the goodwill of all the senior and upcoming new poets, we have survived so long.
Give me a minute. Give me a minute.
Absolutely, absolutely, Keki ji. And today we are very, very honored to have Keki Daruwalla inaugurate our poetry festival. In fact, most of all the poets that are there over the over the 2 days need no introduction, but just as a formality, I'm going to give very, very short introductions to all the poets, because if I go into everything that they have achieved so far, it will take us halfway through the program. So I would introduce Keki Daruwalla just as a formality because he needs no introduction. Keki is a Sahitya Academy winner and a Padma Shri Award winner. He is a poet laureate. I was so happy to be in that particular festival where he spoke. Having several fiction and poetry books to his credit, his most recent poetry collection is Nashpur and Babylon, and his third novel is Swerving to Solitude. And I'm very happy to announce, I think for the first time, that his new book of poetry, Landfall on Canto 10, is forthcoming very soon. We look forward to that. Welcome, Keki, and I hand over the mic and the screen to you. Please unmute yourself, Keki.
Muted myself.
Yes, and here we go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anjali Purohit. You've done me a very, very great honor, and I'm very grateful. Uh, this is a big thing while we are wading through a pandemic which is now at the moment really raging, both in your city in Bombay or Mumbai, and certainly in my city, Delhi. I'm not going to start with any ponderous statements on poetry, what poetry is or what poetry is not. I recall that my first request, of course, is to Anjali Purohit that you should call younger people like Dev Patel and Adil Jasawala, people with a spring in their step, and not and leave alone the people over the hill like me. I was thinking of Nissim Ezekiel. I mean, the first poet apart from Kersi Katrak from Bombay, but when I came to Bombay in 1956, the first person I met was Nissim Ezekiel. He was in charge of the imprint at that moment. And I have please don't forget that on 2024, that means in another 3 years, Mumbai should be hosting a centenary celebration for Nissim. And I'll start with a poem, a very fine poem by Kavita Ezekiel, his daughter, to address to his father. I'm going to read it. Kavita Ezekiel, my father, dedicated to my father who sadly passed away from Alzheimer's in 2004. Here it is. The poem. My father could not talk to me before he died, could not reach me in a distant land, twinned in spirit, separated by geography. She is in Canada. I heard he remembered me, said he could never forget me. Memory without memory, not able to remember, not able to forget, trapped in a maze of loss. Two losses, the greater loss is mine. It's a very, very fine poem. And I'm very happy to have read it out to this very distinguished audience. I would suggest that in this pandemic year, or I would love to call it an epidemic year and be done with the pandemic is a bit too confusing for me. In this epidemic year, let's talk about the good things. And so I'm going to read a poem which I wrote during the millennium year, This Miracle, though the millennium year proved a terrible catastrophe for me, but before the catastrophe, I'd written the poem. Here it goes, This Miracle. The miracle of the dawn prayer, gold in its hair, and of the vespers, lamp black after dusk, and the monotone of the night cricket, solitary, articulate, the miracle of high pastures, a dwarf deer's gland in musk, the miracle of the snow line, melt line, water roar, glacier green as a carbuncle, river gleaming white, mirroring the clouds, no clouded leopard here, says the herdsman. What troubles us is the black panther, blacker than the night. The seasons, sensual as flesh. I'm happy with that line. The seasons, sensual as flesh, as they go the rounds. The promontory crowded with vultures. The estuary marked with gulls. The sea there, as always, and the harbor swarming with schooner and sailboat, rudders, masts, and hulls. But constellations, brittle coral, firm as rock, thick smell of frying fish, the lighthouse so wrapped in history, it forgot to turn on its light. But constellations switch on their mysteries as the magi fish for omens, sing hymns, celebratory, forget sickness, blight, the wonder of the calendar that makes us forget. The years are seamless. Come on, turn the page. This miracle, the world dragged by the time's oxen into another furrow, another seedbed, another age.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My second poem is on birth. Sorry. It's the birth of a foal. When I was in Kashmir. They are usually birthed in February, March, and February is a very cold month. And here is the poem I can't show it. The foal. Always when the foal is born, night is over, it is dawn. Here the night is gray and young, the stars draw upwards, rung on rung. The birth is normally at night, incidentally. Here the night is grey and young. The stars crawl upwards, rung on rung. The first cold feet of splintered glass, the dew condensing on the grass. In store for them is freezing cold, for mother mare and coming foal. A bed of straw is snugly laid, sheaf on sheaf and blade on blade. The farmhand sees through creaking door. Her hooves turn restless on the floor. She circles round but doesn't groan, a restless stammer on the stone. Then she lies down on the straw. The foal has started moving now. Soon a bag, toy horse, and blood lie gently heaving in the mud. Four thin twig-like legs appear to sign the end of this dark year. For quite some time the legs don't kick. The foal awaits the mother's lick. Where's the dark and where's the cold? The mother's steam breath warms the foal. Slowly the eyes are licked quite clean, and sight appears through webbed screen. Always when the foal is born, night is over, it is dawn.
Which book is this from, Keki?
They're all in my collected poems. Now I forget which book is. I think it is the last. The penultimate. The penultimate. Okay. Now I'll read. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sky River. Gentler poem. Sky River. May I read it? A dream, this is the penultimate, I hope. I think so. I hope I'm not running out of time. Okay. A dream meditation is neither dream nor meditation. Looking into the still river, which is not still, I see the sky translated there, along with the still river, which is not still. The sky moves and does not move, for it is where it was in the riverbed, a blue bowl filled with water. I'm seeing obviously the sky and the river, and that's what the poem is about. Colors change when they fall into water. In the mirror's eye, in the water's eye, you somehow deal with another sky. What makes the sky throb here is the current running under the stillness of the river. Dreams give you answers, meditations give you answers. A dream meditation only gives you a tremulous sky in the nervous stillness of the river. Just two short poems. Yes, Greek vases, which I spent one night in Toronto. I don't want to go into the history, and went to the museum and saw the Greek vases, and much later wrote the poem. Greek vases. This is from my last poetry book. On their red and black vases and their amphorae, the equatorial bulge of their amphorae, are spearmen setting out, one of them about to climb onto a one-horse chariot. When soldiers move, one knows their travel plans, long sapping marches through scrub and marsh and desert from where the oases have fled. Till one night they come upon an escarpment overlooking a plain embered with campfires Trojan or Turk or Persian, and know in the pit of their hearts that the next dawn means enemy horse and steel. But we are circling black vase and amphora in a museum and find the spearmen clad in armor and their spears etched on the baked memory of clay. Spears longer than the lines of Homer or the chronicle of Callisthenes. Behind them are tearful women, wives and mothers, always in black, as if already in mourning. Lament and prophecy, Trojan women, Andromache and Cassandra clamber onto the vase without being there. And the last one is related to the current Mumbai. Oh, I'm not reading a poem from my last book. It is the Night Sea, but I think we are running out of time. I'll read on Don Quixote and I. I'm getting more and more bumptious. Please forgive me. As Don Quixote and I holler that a minister asked for 1,000 million each month from dance bars and chickpea kiosks, we are laughed at. Sancho Panza shakes dandruffed head. Even Barn Nag, Rocinante, whom Brits call Rosinette, neighs disapproval. I feed her oats. Story resumes. Yun Policia, thrown out decades back, murder charge still overhanging, is stitched back to the force. Nag shakes her head in anger, and horse dung steams out of her backside. Policia in Fens SUV plants gelignite sticks and parks SUV outside Rothschild's house for the night. Pay up, son, or you'll be dead. At which Nag turns around and almost kicks me. 2 days later, the murdered friend is fished out of the sea. I trudge back home with Quixote, a penumbra of unbelief like a mosquito cloud hangs overhead. Windmill shadows whirl away in the sky. I give the Dom una copa de vino rosado, rosé wine. When Miguel Cervantes enters as writer to another, I ask, can I make a novel out of this? Who will believe it, he says. Write a poem. Thank you. Oh, I wanted to read Night Sea, but can you give me a minute?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is from my coming book, and this is on the Night Sea in Salamis. I was asked by them to write on Cyprus. I was in Cyprus for Stephanides' farewell, a very fine poet, world poet, Night Sea. The Night Sea is a philosopher. It is soft in the head, speaks to itself. The Night Sea is a truth seeker, rumbles within itself to find the truth. Each wave is the Night Sea entire. When it climbs, its foam line hangs on top and moves into timelessness. Moment as meditation, transcendent, still. The Night Sea is a bowl, has bragging rights. It knows it's as large as the vault of the sky. The night sea is the night sea. It is a different being. Argosies on the night seas are perfumed. Incense trees from Panth to Hatshepsut are still fragrant. Perfume shimmies out from cedar wood boxes that holds on to the frankincense within. The night sea is a purifier. Its music rinses the soul clean. Thank you very much, Anjali Purohit.
Well, thank you so much, Keki. It was a great honor having you inaugurate the festival. And
What
your
an honor.
beautiful poetry and your sharp, sharp cutting wit. I can't forget the Don Quixote of Keki Daruwalla. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We go now to Suhit and our second session. Uh, Keki, if you might mute yourself, please.
Okay, okay.
Otherwise, there's an echo.
Yes.
Yes, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Hello, Suhit. We are waiting for Sarabjeet to come on. Sarabjeet, very good. Welcome, Sarabjeet and Suhit. Today we are in conversation. Sarabjeet is in conversation with Suhit Kelkar about this book of Suhit's, Mumbai Monochrome, which is an images and poetry. I hand over the stage and the mic to you. Before that, I will very briefly introduce both of you. Suhit Kelkar, the author of this book, is a poet, journalist, and photographer based in Mumbai. His works have appeared in a number of prestigious publications in India and abroad. Kelkar's first published book was a poetry chapbook called The Centaur Chronicles, which deployed the figure of the centaur to explore issues of discrimination and social alienation. Mumbai Monochrome is his second book. And welcome, Suhit.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you so much for graciously inviting me to be a part of this
It's
wonderful event.
our pleasure to have you and the book on our.
And I must also thank Sarabjeet Garcha for so kindly agreeing to
Indeed,
have this
yes.
chat.
Thank you for the invitation, Anjali. Addebazi, I believe, is always good for the soul.
It is, certainly is.
Especially during pandemic, we miss the Addebazi really. So thank you for making this possible.
Thank you for being with us. I'll very briefly introduce Sarabjeet. Sarabjeet is a widely published poet and translator, the author of 4 books of poems, including A Clock in the Far Past, as well as a volume of translated poetry and one of prose. He has translated several American poets into Hindi and several Indian poets into English. Sarabjeet is also the founder and editorial director of Coppercoin, a multilingual publishing company which brings out some of the finest poetry books in the country. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anjali. Good to see you, Suhit.
Likewise.
I thank you for the opportunity. See, I enjoyed reading your book a lot. And the first question that comes to my mind is, why did you choose haiku over free verse for Mumbai Monochrome?
That's a great question. And if I may boil it down to to a few words, the haiku, I began writing seriously with haiku, which was a number of years back before I actually managed to get a full-length poem to a state that satisfied me. So during the pandemic, it was some sort of process where I found that I had written one haiku, and it suddenly brought back, sometimes you jot something down, right? You jot down a stray idea, and then you see what form it will take. And this one became a haiku. And then I was suddenly taken back to the past and thought I could close a kind of a circle by incorporating haiku into this hybrid project. And it was a totally personal. It was out of a feeling of personal satisfaction that I chose haiku instead of free verse for this.
So when you set about putting the book together, you did not really have poetry in mind. You just had photography.
That's absolutely right. But I spoke to a friend of mine, a very well-known photographer called Sudharak Olve, and he suggested that why don't you put some poetry in? And I'm like, okay, I do both these things. I'm passionate about both these things, so why not let the book be a hybrid of them. So that is how haiku and photos came together. And of course, you know this, but the tradition of mixing or juxtaposing haiku with visuals is a very old tradition. It is hundreds of years old. There are hybrid forms in which paintings have a haiku at the corner, and the creative conversation between the two forms becomes a third thing. So I was also quite mindful of the history of the haiku and its adaptability for the visual form when I was putting this book together.
Do we have precedents of this juxtaposition in India?
It is a difficult to answer question, simply because we in India are not very good at archiving our poetic history. As you know, most poetry is published by small presses in India. And even when it is published by mainstream presses, it comes out in vanishingly small print runs. And once they are gone, they are gone. So I'm sure that there have been hybrid works like this happening.
Which we don't know of, probably.
Which we don't know of. If a tree fell in the forest without making a sound, did it really fall? Was there really a tree? We don't know. So I'm sure this is not the first, but in recent times, it probably is. In recent years, there is not very much like it.
Suhit, do you think the haiku in the book work only in tandem with the photographs, or do they stand independently also?
Well, that's a good question. Some of them might stand independently, but since nearly all of them were written after looking at the photographs and after visualizing the scenes that gave rise to those photographs, they are not really meant to be taken out of context in that way. Some of them can be taken out of context, can stand alone on their own, but they are not really meant for that.
Since you wrote the haiku after looking at the photographs, were there instances where you dropped the photograph after writing the haiku?
No, because the process was like, first I selected about 120, a long list of 120 photographs. Then I whittled it down to about, 60 maybe. And then I brought that down to 40.
Yeah.
So once that was done, it was pretty much, and it arranged itself beautifully into a sequence. Which comes what? So if you look at the book, there is a temporal shift in the sequence from morning to night.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So that was very rigid in my mind, although it need not be. But it was rigid in my mind. So I was convinced that I should not tamper with the order of the photographs, that I should pretty much keep writing the haiku until they reached a state where they could be paired with the photographs.
So at least for the book, you got the most difficult thing right in your first attempt. That is the order of the photographs. Because for a poet, you see, ordering is very difficult. It's very difficult. even for seasoned photographs to order their poems.
Mhm.
See, I also struggle with it. You see, I've heard of many other people who struggle with it.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that you had that order in mind. Congratulations for that. And in the preface, you say that the art of photography should focus on meaning making.
Mhm.
So how do you make meaning?
That's a good question. See, in my case, a photograph is, see, I was trained in photojournalism.
Hmm.
Because by profession, I'm a journalist, and I also then trained in photojournalism with qualified photojournalists. So basically, photojournalism really is storytelling. It doesn't tell you a story from beginning to end, but it tells you about a story, about a snapshot of a story, a
Hmm.
cross section of a story, one pane from a story, which
Hmm.
gives you an indication of what the whole thing or a substantial part of it might look like.
Hmm.
So I come to it from that discipline, and there are several disciplines in photography. There is fine art photography, which is more conceptual, more abstract. Mine is more descriptive and more of a scene setting. So it is a scene setting that if you can read a photograph according to the scene that is depicted in it, then that, according to me, goes a long way towards making its meaning. And then
Hmm.
there are layers to it. There are, of course, layers which you will bring to it in terms of concepts and metaphors.
Hmm. Suhit,
So
I noticed that the book was published in 2020, I think towards the end of 2020,
Mhm.
and we are still in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But you managed to keep the pandemic out of your book. Was it conscious, or did it happen on its own?
Yeah. No. Again, I would like to, first of all, I'd like to thank the publishers of the book, Bhavakal, who very proactively and very, with great celerity and pace, they brought it out, despite
Mhm.
there being a pandemic. But so what was happening in the pandemic was that I was confined at home like all of us, and I was not able to use my camera. So I grew a little frustrated, and I was going through my archive of photos over the past 2 or 3 years. And I realized, okay, there is a collection of photos in here, because they're all about Mumbai. They're all about specific moods or specific themes.
Hmm.
Uh, so the product, so the book is a product of an archiving process. And
Right.
during the pandemic, it was honestly so dispiriting and depressing what was happening around us, where we were scurrying about the streets in fear like rats, crawling back to our holes, afraid of the light almost.
Hmm.
That it, I became very averse to taking photos during the lockdown. Uh, so I stuck to my archive, and what I produced was a record of life before the pandemic,
So okay,
as I saw it.
you did not take any photographs during the pandemic.
Nothing. I don't even have a single photo of the pandemic, which is weird. But then neither do I have any written record of the pandemic.
Uh, I think that's okay. We should not really put ourselves under pressure that we
Yeah,
have to produce something related to the pandemic.
yeah.
And your preface says this striking sentence: the combined weight of biology, psychology, technology, and culture presses the shutter button.
Yes,
Can you elaborate on this combination, especially
yes.
in the light of Mumbai culture?
Correct. So it's a general statement, but I take great issue with the statement that photography is purely a spontaneous process.
Hmm.
Photography is the photo may be spontaneous, but the instinct that identifies the scene in a split second comes out of training.
Hmm.
It comes out of looking at other people's photos. It comes out of looking at paintings. Sometimes it can come out of looking at poems also, or a piece or a movie.
Hmm.
So there is training. There are other cross-cultural references which determine the way that one composes and identifies the frame. But then there is also the way, the quickness of your biological responses. I have very, very sharp responses. And this was true before I became a photographer, but I see a scene immediately. So there is biology there, there is culture there. And then of course, there is the interplay of the self and the world mediated through the camera, where your upbringing determines what you will include in the frame and what you will leave out. So your biases, what you find worthy of recording or noticing, and what you don't notice, all that operates in that split second it takes to press the shutter button.
And maybe you accidentally click something that you think is not worthy, but later realize it is valuable.
Yes.
Does that also happen?
Absolutely. It happens rarely. It used to happen earlier. It didn't used to happen at all, because I was very, very self-conscious while taking pictures. I didn't want to waste a photo, even though we are not using film anymore. We are in digital. So the concept of wasting photos does not exist anymore, at least not in the conventional sense. But I used to be afraid so much of making a mistake, of failing at taking a photo, of missing a photo, that I used to take very few photos. But now that I'm more spontaneous, more in the moment, more instinctive in a sense, that sometimes I manage to bypass the calculating mind and go purely into the source of the fascination. And it's only later on that when I see the photo on the computer screen, that I realize that there is a design behind the choosing of this photograph, the taking of this photograph. It happens.
Coming back to haiku, Manglesh Dabral used to believe that only a true Buddhist can write a true haiku. What do you say to that?
Well, no, that's not at all true. If you look at the hundreds of year-old traditions of haiku, to which we are thankful, we should be thankful to Japan, and then also China and other places in Southeast Asia, before the haiku marched or gently came into India. Many of the haiku poets were not Buddhists. Many of the great haiku poets were not Buddhists. Some were, I can't readily come up with names at the moment, but some were staunch Buddhists, some were non-practicing, some were not Buddhists at all. And for some, the haiku was a rebellion against Buddhism also. So there is, for instance, there is a haiku, which I will paraphrase it because I don't remember the exact words, but a famous Japanese poet wrote a haiku which said, that I've turned my back on enlightenment and I'm enjoying the beauties of the world around me. And there was another poet who said that, one shot of sake and the moon appears. So the moon appears in the Japanese of that time was a euphemism for the male erection.
Okay.
So he was talking about enjoying sensual pleasures of the flesh. So haiku was a very, it was a capacious tradition, which there are a lot of Zen poetry, Buddhist poetry is haiku, but a lot of non-Buddhist poetry is also haiku.
And but what do you say to the misuse and assault of haiku that you see we are being subjected to continuously by bad people?
Look, I am a that's a good question, but I'm a practitioner. But what I can say, what I can say without being unkind, is that unlike other forms of poetry, which have now evolved, or shall we say, which have now morphed into their present state, the entry barrier for entering the haiku tradition or haiku modernity, whatever you call it, is very low. You're operating in a very small canvas. So when you begin to write, it is inevitable that you will write crap. Everybody writes crap. We still write crap. I still write crap. You still write crap, despite of the fact that we've been published for years now. But the difference between the beginner and the shall we say speaking of myself, the more advanced beginner, is that we don't publish crap. We don't submit it. We destroy it. So, so it happens, and because the haiku is relatively easy to get right and therefore to get wrong,
Right.
this will happen. But hopefully, people read before they write or read alongside their writing. So that, and when they submit to magazines, because everybody wants, if you write haiku,
True.
you want to publish them. It's a meme, right? It's a very small thing. It's in this world of social media, it spreads easily. So you want to publish it. And there people will pull you down, cut you to size, because there the editors are very, very rigorous. Because they know that a haiku is easy to get, is easy to finish. They also know it is difficult to get right. So a lot of rejections will take place, and then people will gradually get better.
Right. Okay.
And that happens. We have a lot of excellent haikuists in this country. Apart from, I don't know, the other ones.
Right. Almost all the photographs in the book evoke a kind of small town stasis. Was this an act of discovery or the fruit of intent?
So, yeah, that's a great observation, which is something that I haven't, no one's ever said to me before, which is a small town stasis. See, I grew up in a small town, right? So it might be that even in Bombay, even in Maha Mumbai, as we call it in Marathi, I'm still looking for some elements of that small town. But also, I favor the quieter side of Bombay, and it exists. Most mainstream depictions of Bombay are, the glitz, the glamour, the crowds, the trains, the larger than life-ness of it. But I am attracted to the quieter places, the quieter scenes, the more reflective, ruminative scenes,
What are some of those quieter places and some that you love?
Yes.
That you visit again and again?
Absolutely. So the villages of Bandra, the urban villages of Bandra are definitely, I've plumbed their lanes so many times that I don't even remember. And I'm also attracted to places which are not overly busy. So the island city, the city which is south of the Bandra Creek, leading all the way up to the tip of Kulaba, that is mainly my catchment area. That is where I roam around doing street photography, because I find that the rhythms of that area are more languid. They are less hectic, and I can absorb them and do something on the street.
There's a wonderful photograph in the book, if I remember it right. Maybe it's on page 46 or 49 of a father and son standing together. Can you just share it with us and tell us something about that photograph?
Yes, I'd love to, and thank you. It's I like that photo too. Okay, Anjali, you'll have to enable screen sharing. I'm sorry, that option is there, but it's so you have to go to the participant list and hover your mouse over my name. You will see something called More. Are you getting it? If not, it's okay.
No, I'll get it.
All right.
I make host.
Make host. Yeah.
I change host.
Yeah. Do you see it up? There you go. So now, okay, now I can share my screen.
Okay.
Thank you, Anjali. Okay, can you guys see this? This is the,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'll go to page 46, as you said, with the father and the son. And this is, of course, the PDF version of the book. Here we go. So right. This is the photo you're referring to, Sarabjeet.
Yes.
Right. So basically, this is a photo from Dharavi Kolivada, which is an urban village located in Dharavi, which,
Hmm.
a village which possibly predates Bombay as we know it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then the city grew around it and incorporated it. But the distinctive rural feel of that place is still there to some extent. So this is a shot in the holy Maidan of Dharavi Kolivada during Holi. And Holi is the biggest festival for the Koli community, which dominates, which is the largest community in Dharavi, Kolivada, as the name suggests. So this is the father, possibly a father and his son, dressed in
Yeah.
traditional Koli costume. And what they're holding is not a stick. It's actually a stalk of sugarcane, because the Koli custom is to offer sugarcane and coconuts, green coconuts, to the holy bonfire. So that is what they're doing, and this is and that light is just there fortuitously. They had floodlit the whole scene, so the camera, it's not as good as the human eye, so the camera cannot adjust to harsh light, so it shows it like an orb.
Suhit, there's one more photograph of a monk looking at a rack with books.
Yes. Where is it? Okay, it's before this one. There you go. This is one. And this was also taken in a home with my phone, mobile camera. And this is, this monk had gone to a friend's house to perform a Buddhist ritual.
Okay.
And I was present there. And everybody then, after the ritual, everybody went into another room to do something. And this guy, who is an apprentice to a senior monk, he was just looking at the books, and the scene just framed itself. There's light and dark, there is quietness, there is contemplation, there is, it's an opulent looking house, but he's an austere monk, so there is that contrast as well.
It appears that from his island of silence, he's having starting another conversation with Sansara.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
It's a beautiful photograph.
Thank you.
And you see, what serenity are you searching for in a city like Mumbai?
Again, this serenity comes from my history with the city. I came to the city to find work, like most people do. And I became a journalist with a daily newspaper, with a series of daily newspaper. And as you know from experience, Sarabjeet, it is a very, very hectic and demanding thing.
Yes.
And you see, as a daily journalist who covers civic affairs or whatever, you see the worst side of the city. You see fires, and you see flooding, and you see human misery. And so after all these years, when I don't do that job anymore, I know I cover arts and culture as a journalist now, but I'm still reacting to that past. I'm still trying to defiantly say, no, this is Bombay. It is not all. That is not all there is to Bombay. It is also a quiet place. It is also a place where there is refuge.
And again, on page 26, you have these words: after cliche comes compassion. Do you think that those who favor cliches are necessarily violent?
Oh my God. Well, you've put me on the spot with this one. But okay. Well, no, not necessarily. But after cliche comes compassion. And the cliche really could be interpreted in different ways. Could at one level be interpreted as helping with an ulterior motive. Helping without compassion, but without, just because it is good to be seen helping somebody. But then when you enter that act, then something happens to you and you feel that compassion. So that could be interpreted one way, but it's deliberately open-ended. It's not meant to be pinned down to any absolute meaning as such, I think.
Well, writing gurus say that the whole act of writing is a constant constant resistance against cliches.
Uh,
So
I
yeah,
know, yeah, absolutely, and it's something, all of us begin with writing cliches unless,
we do.
so we have to train ourselves in a way to just not stay away from them, I guess.
Right.
But there are also cliches of behavior. There are also cliches of, conceptual cliches and
There
literary
are,
cliches. Yeah.
in Hindi we call them granthi.
Ji, ji,
So
ji,
you're right
bilkul,
about
bilkul.
it.
Right.
So Suhit, would you like to read a couple of haiku for us?
Certainly. I'm particularly happy with the very first one in the book.
Mhm.
Uh, and let me tell you that I might have written hundreds of haiku, but what I'm really very happy with maybe five of them.
Okay.
Yeah, and those five are very dear to me, as dear as my full-length poems, the few that I get right there. Crossroads, I wait for the cool wind to go first.
Yeah.
And this is a photo, this embodies, if you're interested in the academic aspects of this haiku, there are some, uh,
Mhm.
which is that, there is this traditional haiku value of respect for nature.
Hmm.
The haikuist wants to leave only his footprints behind, nothing else. When he's walking through a natural vista. So this was a nod to that. But this haiku has actually come from life. I used to stay in New Bombay. I spent a year living in New Bombay. And I
Hmm.
was passing in front of a square or a rather large stretch of road uh, where opposite the National Institute of Fashion Technology in Kharghar,
Hmm.
when there was actually a gust of wind.
Do
And I
you count syllables while writing haiku,
no,
Suhit?
no, absolutely not. Uh, it's a complete waste of. It's not advisable to count syllables anymore,
Okay.
because then you are forcing English language into an unnatural form. You
True.
know, and in fact, the current practitioners of haiku don't really follow the syllabic 5-7-5 pattern anymore. They count the beats, or they count the fragment and the sentence.
Right. I think we have time for four more haiku, your favorites. Would you like to share them with us?
Certainly. Children's sandals headed nowhere, my bloodline. Self-explanatory.
Yeah.
You know, a single
Wonderful.
a single person, an unmarried person, is saying, "Okay, what happens to my bloodline?"
Hmm. Hmm.
The dog's leash in its own mouth. I recall my obsessions.
This is brilliant.
Thank you. And this photo is taken literally on the street next to my house. So, you just walk somewhere, and even when you don't have a camera with you, there's always a good camera or a decent camera in the form of the mobile phone. And this
Yeah,
is
I noticed that there are 3 or 4 photographs which you've taken using your mobile phone in the book.
you'll be surprised, but over 90% of the photos in the book are taken using my mobile phone.
Wow.
Because sometimes, you don't have uh, now I don't do that. After the book came out, or even before the book came out a little, I started shooting exclusively on a proper professional camera. But before that, I was just doing it on a cell phone, because cell phones, quite frankly, are good enough for this level of detail and this size of photo.
Yeah.
uh, Here we go. Missing having a pet at my heels, noonday shadow.
This is another great one.
Thank you. And this is also a mobile photo. The
Yeah.
cat were very nicely obliged me by giving me a nice little, by sitting still while I
And I,
literally got down on my knees and, squatted and took the photo to be at its eye level. uh, Blindfold, yet a dream keeps him awake. This is one of my neighbors. This was one of my neighbors who died in the pandemic, actually. probably because of COVID, but we don't know really. And this is how he used to sleep. He used to sleep in a chair with a blindfold so that the sun wouldn't wake him up. So yeah.
Maybe a last haiku.
All right. Here we go. Seeking a new poem, I look down someone else's footsteps.
You've summed up the very act of writing.
Thank you. And this is the only photo, I think, or probably the only photo which is taken in North Bombay.
North Bombay.
North
So
of
you roamed the length and breadth of Bombay for your book.
Not, you'll be surprised, but I haven't even touched maybe 1% of, or maybe I haven't even touched 5% of Bombay's area. So, I don't, whatever lifetime is there for me, I think I can spend a significant, there's lots of Bombay left, I think, to explore.
Thank you, Suhit. I think we might not have time for the questions.
Sure.
But maybe if there are questions, Anjali can take them on our behalf.
Certainly.
And it was wonderful talking to you. All the best for your future projects, Suhit.
Thank you, Sarabjeet. And
there will be more photographs and more poems coming.
Yes, indeed. And I really admire the way you handled this session. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anjali, for the opportunity.
And it seems that we have, no, we don't have a question, but Ranjit Hoskote says such a lovely conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you, Ranjit.
And thank you, Suhit. And thank you, Sarabjeet, for being so generous with your time and effort. Thanks a lot. Suhit, I'm sorry, but you'll have to tell me what to do now.
All right. So what I will, you don't have to do anything really. You can transfer the host privileges to yourself again.
How do I do that?
You go to the participant.
Do I say reclaim host?
Yes, you go back to the participant list and you hover the mouse over your name and you'll get a bunch of...
I get more. No, I get only rename and edit profile picture, but down there is reclaim host. So should I?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I hope this works.
Yes, it will.
Yes.
And there you go.
Oh, I am.
So thank you so much. I will now
thank you,
step
Suhit.
down.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. Goodbye.
Are you guys staying on, or what are you doing?
They'll be there in the side.
Okay.
And welcome, Ranjit.
Thank you. Thank you for
I'm so
having me.
glad you could make it in time.
Yes, indeed.
And all your busy.
No, today was just
hectic.
Chores and errands, very practical, everyday things.
Unexpected. But you missed a brilliant reading by Keki.
I am deeply sorry that I had to join up late.
But okay, just as a formality, I shall welcome Ranjit. It is your home. The Cappuccino Adda is your home. So I don't know how one welcomes somebody to their own home. Nevertheless, welcome. Ranjit Hoskote is a poet, cultural theorist, and curator. His 7 collections of poetry include Vanishing Acts, Central Crime, and Jonah Whale. He's also the author of I Lala, the poems of Lal Ded, the editor of Dom Moray's selected poems, and a translator of the legendary Urdu poets Mir and Ghalib. Hoskote curated India's first ever national pavilion at the Venice Biennale. He has received the Sahitya Academy Golden Jubilee Award, the Sahitya Academy Translation Award, and the S.H. Raza Literature Award. His poems have been translated into German, Hindi, Bengali, Irish, Marathi, Swedish, and Spanish. Welcome, Ranjit. Very, very honored and happy to...
Very happy to be here, actually.
You and this little book, HUNCHPROSE, which really I'm totally in love with the book. So you must pardon me if I take a little longer time talking about the book. But Ranjit Hoskote's HUNCHPROSE, the book It is a tapestry woven with great tenderness and love. A tapestry of complementary colors where there is the delicacy of dust on a butterfly's wing, but also where Ranjit never lets you forget the glint of a flint knife, the low growl of hunting dogs, a gunpowder track that snakes through a crowd, torched towns, and trains carrying their death load. But underlying fabric of this tapestry is his deep understanding that the world of nature, as well as human society and civilization, consists of fluid and syncretic interconnectedness. Shared influences and the trade between cultures, traditions, belief systems, and knowledge are what gives us our identity. And it is this identity that Ranjit has consistently emphasized over the years in his writings, essays, lectures, and of course, his poetry. His works speak of the dangers of collapsing into narrow singularities. They underline that identity is a dangerous hoax if it tells you that narrowness and exclusivity is its basis, when it is borne out by history that the identities we have inherited from the past are plural. So, my question to you, Ranjit, would be that there are these two views of identity. One is, of course, uh, this identity as what we have described just now, a sort of a very unipolar view of things and of identity. And the second, which is also so evident in your poems, Ranjit, the identity where we look for an identity for ourselves, some place we can call home, a belonging. And on the other hand, the identity you speak of as being exclusionary and othering. So, how do you collate these two concepts in your writing?
Thanks so much for those observations, Anjali, and also for the question. You're right. Whether it's in my poetry or whether it's in a book like Confluences, which Ilya Troyanov and I wrote together, it is a driving preoccupation with me. And I would say it's not really an academic preoccupation. For me, it's an existential and an experiential reality to which I would bear witness. And it is all the more important to do this today because we are on all hands surrounded by forces of polarization. People, texts, narratives, ideologies, which tell us that we are actually very narrow, that each of us is a narrow consciousness, that we can go back to a single source. Much of this is imaginary. I mean, this entire notion of a singular origin is an extremely dangerous and a specifically modern idea. So I've always found it hugely entertaining. If it wasn't so dangerous, it would be entertaining. That people who believe that they're speaking the name of some 5,000-year-old tradition are actually speaking out of a 19th century ideology, which came from Europe, by the way, did not emanate from Banaras or anywhere else. In fact, if you speak to the Mahant of the Sankat Mochan temple in Banaras, you will find an extremely plural, richly inclusive vision, which is the real Hindu vision, not the rubbish that you're sold by snake oil salesmen who try and tell you that because you are so insecure and you are so terrified of your own shadow, you need to other people and you need to annihilate them. Any identity that depends on the annihilation of the other is not worth having. It's a token of insincerity. It's a token of really a lack of confidence. If you're genuinely confident about your identity, you will be open to the fact that it is always historically for anybody been diverse. You look back a few generations, look back a few centuries, and you'll see what I mean. Whether it's at the level of religion, religious practices, language, race, look where you will find that it is plurality and diversity that nourish the individual.
That's so beautifully put, Ranjit, and it just bears repeating and underlining 1,000 times, especially today. Mm. And this particular idea, concept of the interconnectedness between cultures and traditions also stems from your very deep understanding of history, history in its various forms, whether it's economic history or the history of the development of knowledge. Mm, so, I would say that your poetry, Ranjit, is suffused with an overarching sense and knowledge of history and the development of civilizations, what we ought to learn from it. Because, and this is particularly evident in so many of your poems, even in your other collections, where you seem to say that history consists not only of accounts of kingdoms, rulers, victories and defeats of nations, but also of the narrations of the lives and experiences of individuals and peoples that lived under such rules. And in that context, often you have picked out stories and narrations from history, from the past, and highlighted them in your poems. I would think especially of your poems, of course, Siddhi Mubarak, which begins this book. And in fact, but we have spoken about it in past talks you have had about the book. So I would like to point out your poem Lemuria, which speaks about so many things, colonization and how, they exchanged their whole culture for beads, and how it also implied the erasure of languages, apart from the erasures of so much that those traditions held. So Lemuria, Ugarit, I would like you to tell us more about Ugarit, because it's a very, very touching story. And then, sorry if I'm imposing too much, but if you might read Bone Setter,
Sure.
because I love that poem. So over to you, Ranjit.
Sure. Thanks so much, Anjali. Also, let me just, by way of response to you, to the very engaged response you made to my poems, let me just say that to me, it's not really a question of carrying along a large bibliography. That's the work you do, but it's not the aim of the poetry. I think the poetry that the kinds of poems that I write where I'm responding to history, those poems come from a sense that we, each of us, have a deep scale of time and an intense experience of history to fall back on and to draw on and to learn from. I think one of our greatest dangers is historical amnesia. It's when you forget what went before that you might either want to rush about setting something right when it wasn't particularly wrong, or wanting to set right something that has already achieved a balance in experience, or you might simply not realize that something has happened well before you and they're not rediscovering something. So to me, the formal challenge also is how to develop poems that are as elucid, as limpid, as lapidary as they can get, even whilst being engaged with these larger stories. And in that, I would say that I've learned a great deal from a global tradition of poets who address these questions. What does it mean to be the inheritor of a certain history or histories? What does it mean to bear witness to that? And what does it mean to yet look beyond the horizon of the historical? Keki Daruwalla, who's here, for instance, has always been a great inspiration. Czeslaw Miłosz, Derek Walcott in his own way, Konstantin Cavafy. I mean, I can think of any number of poets whose work I respond to, because to them, the past and history are a living reality and they're a lived reality. And that's the point I want to make, because sometimes when I read about my own poetry, I get the feeling that, it's somehow the annotations that seem to spring up. And to me, the annotation is something that comes afterwards. What is important is that we all live in simultaneous tenses. We live in simultaneous periods. And that's the experience that I'm trying to convey through these poems, at least to explore it. So Anjali, let me also read a couple of the poems that you suggested I read. Shall I read Letters from Ugarit? It's the poem that closes the book. The book opens with Siddhi Mubarak Bombay, a first-person narration across linguistic experiences by somebody who was brought to Bombay in the 19th century as a child slave, then was emancipated and went back to Zanzibar and lived always between places and among languages. And I close with Letters from Ugarit, which is a visiting of a Bronze Age city on the Syrian coast. I'll read it and then I'll talk about it maybe. Those of you who haven't yet read the book should know that there are italicized sections within it, which actually come from the cuneiform clay tablets that were found in Ugarit. And the irony is that we only have these records of the city's end because those tablets were baked in the fires that destroyed the city. So I'm always fascinated by the ways in which the forces of civilization and the forces of destruction are constantly chasing one another down the course of the centuries. Also, Ugarit is where the alphabet began. So it is, to any writer, it should be a sacred city because it's where the alphabet as we understand it today was invented. And that's what the poem is partly about. Letters from Ugarit. Fire saved these words, cut into clay, chorded sounds of desert and surf gouged into flesh. Father, look, the enemy's ships, the sea people, my cities torched. These words saved no one, not sender, not receiver. My country burning, my chariots lost, words that did not carry across the numb sand. Your messenger saw our threshing floors charred, our vineyards ripped up from their roots. Messenger, we could have been howling on the moon's far side. With his barbed whip, Marduk cut down my guardian angel. He broke my shield, he drove me from my house. No one heard, no one cried when they heard these baked sounds. Other hands would draw and fit into tamer molds. Alpu, Betu, Gamu, ox, house, camel. Recording barrels and bales. Marduk, pull me from the river, listing sails and hulls. Marduk, let this cloud pass. Sounds that have rung through every changing, trembling shape. Even when the reed breaks, the ink fades, and there is no moon. Save these words.
Very, very beautiful.
Thank you. And maybe I'll read a section from Lemuria,
Yes.
which, as of course many of you know, is named for a supposedly lost continent in the Indian Ocean. It's been important in various narratives. It's important to theosophists. It's important to also one strain in Dravidian Dravidian identity politics. But it also, from my point of view here, suggests the lost continent of the people and the languages who were destroyed and erased and enslaved by the forces of colonial empire, which is what the poem's about. I should, by the way, also, and not by the way, but very pertinently point out that among the poets to whose work I respond very strongly and who have, in my view, this ability to work between large historical cycles and the individual quests for interiority, I would also really want to name here and honor the memory of Kumar Narayan. As I wrote recently in an Instagram post, I think he stands alongside Walcott, Miłosz, and others as a global figure of this kind of cosmopolitan sensibility. So I'm going to read a section from Lemuria. Pick a tongue, any tongue. He stopped your language in mid-sentence. The bird call never completed. The navigator's song left dangling. He tossed you glass beads, entered your islands in his logbook and maps. You turned around, saw a stockade, a camp. You heard thunder blaze up to heaven from his guns. Less important than acts, magical virtue, list of screams, magical portent, lay the boundaries. Glass goat with a pointed cardamom tongue sticking from his mouth, he glares at you from a wayside altar, glutted with offal. His name comes to you like the light a star began transmitting 1,000,000 years ago, a message so long in streaming from a source so distant, it can't tell you the source is dead. I do not know your language, you sons of the sea. Escape his cursive pages. Watch his sentences fail the test of years, grow brown with the acid seeping from the paper's pores, the gradual exhalation of words. You do not know what nation we are. To your barrels, our napped flint, to your whip crack, our whisperade. Strike oil, gargoyle, be my ghost.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
And actually, what you say and what is said in poetry such as this is something that cannot be said in any other form, I feel, because history as we read it is an account, but poetry is an account of the past as reflected in the present, and in a way a prophecy for the future. So really it's so important, but I would come to that again, I think. However, just now I'd like to ask you, Ranjit, that Forrest Gander has been quoted in the beginning of this book, speaking about the book, that Hoskote charges the poet with responsibility. Now that that is a very large and strong statement, and which many will say is not correct, because why should a poet have responsibilities of this kind? What is your view on that?
In the first place, I have to say Forrest has been extremely kind in his response to this work. And when he speaks of how the poet is charged with the responsibility, I think that's absolutely true. I think that the poet has always been charged with that responsibility. Even our ancestors, the shamanic poets, the bards, there always was a responsibility, precisely because whether it was through a gift or through your refinement of whatever resources were at your command, or your devotion to your practice, the poet has always had that role of being a voice, not to speak on behalf of society, but to address society, to be at various points the gadfly, to be the celebrant, to be the questioner, to speak truth to power. These are a number of the responsibilities that the poet does indeed have. And the poet also has a responsibility to her or his language, by which I do not mean the particular language that she or he may write in or compose in, that of course. But I mean, what is it that we owe to the language that we make as poets? How might it be renewed constantly to face the stimulus of the time, the political urgency, the psychological questions that arise, the challenges that appear? I think that a key responsibility for the poet is to not only, this is the kind of statement I swore I would never make, by the way, when I was 21 years old, but age catches up with all of us. So for one, I think there's the responsibility to history in some way. You're bearing witness to a time, to a society, to a crisis, or several crises. But you're also responsible for the renewal and the refinement and the transformation of your own language. You're responsible for not settling into a recognizable style and to be complacent about that style. You're also responsible for not getting caught up with notions of finding a voice. I realize that there's some value to this idea of a voice, and I also appreciate it. But I think it's too often understood to mean that, once you find that voice, as though it had been mislaid in the shrubbery, then you need to hang on to it for dear life. In my view, at least, that's not the case. I think a new set of subjects, a new crisis, new experiences will demand of you that you transform your language. And that's certainly increasingly my sense of what we are all about as poets.
Thank you, Ranjit. That really is a very crucial thing that all of us as writers and poets ought to think about and really mull over and see whether it reflects in our own work as well. I'd like to now, Ranjit, skip to one point which I noticed throughout in this book. And in fact, I feel that in this book, plus in Jonah Whale, it started with Jonah Whale and it has, heightened in Hunch Prose, that there is now in this poetry, as perhaps compared to your earlier collections, that there is a great sense of imminence. Imminence as, not eminence, but imminence as in an impending disaster or something which is coming, a sense of urgency. And so what in your views, you already spoke about certain urgencies that are setting in and that we ought to address and speak about. Apart from that, that is on the one hand, you speak of the consequences of unipolarity and despotic and violent tendencies that survive on othering, victimizing, demonizing, and silencing. But on the other hand, again, you also increasingly in this book speak about the ecological disaster that looms before us. And in many, many poems that is there, whether in Endling or those three, Endling, is that a kind of a triptych, Mask and Endling and
Sovereign.
Yes.
Oh, there's a number of them. That's right. It is a sequence embedded into the book. Yeah.
Yes. Also, when we speak of the tenderness in your poetry, with its complement along with it, I was very, very moved by your poem Tree. So if you could read it to us, but before that, to speak on these urgencies that one sees in this book.
Anjali, I'm very struck by your use of the term imminence, because it really is, it's also something that Homi Bhabha has been talking about quite a bit in recent times. The way in which at some point in a work, whether of literature or of art, there is the sense of something yet to be articulated, but that you stand in the presence of. And I think that we're living through a time when we are being called upon to be attuned to this. And in some ways, I don't have a better way of expressing it, but I think that we are called upon to evolve some form of ethic to deal with all of these imminent catastrophes, if you will, and possibilities that are emerging. So certainly while I was writing the book, for instance, while I was working on these poems, I suppose at some deep level, my concern was, how do I, with the or any of us, with the singularity of choice, of our choice, how do we nonetheless embed that with the choices, the compulsions, the vulnerabilities of others? I think to me that remains a key question. So whether we do that as practitioners of a particular language or possessors of a certain degree of privilege, or as a species, I think increasingly this is the most imminent of questions. How do we achieve or recover forms of interrelationship that have been tragically lost along a path of historical choices we've made. One set of choices, as I've been saying often enough, stems from the Enlightenment, from placing the human species as the sovereign species, which is one of the allusions in that poem, over all of the natural world, which then is merely resources or affordances for the human species to make use of. That has brought us to this present crisis. But also as an Anglophone Indian poet, my question is, how do I open myself to the multilinguality of my experience? How do I bring in things I've learned from writers in other languages? How does my work in translation come into what I write, and how does it transform my language? So what you're calling immanence, I think, operates for me at many different levels, more at a conceptual level, at an existential level, but also at the level of artisanal, practical matters. Like, how do I shape this poem? What do I shape it with? What is it that's going to come through? And what language will my poem find? I mean, that's really how I would place it. So there's that a sense of an expectancy, a sense of an experimentation. Maybe this is what gives these poems a certain thrum.
Thanks, Ranjit. Actually, just continuing this thread, it is not that these concerns were not there in the past, but of course, they have become more acute and dire today. And is this perhaps reflected in the change of form in your poems? Because personally, I would say that earlier we admired and appreciated the crafting and aesthetic finesse of your poems. But in Jonavale, and even more so in Hunch Prose, each poem doesn't merely present itself to us. Um, it draws us into itself, almost by the scruff of our necks, so to speak. Is this shift in how you present the poem intentional, or is it just an evolution of the writing?
I think if there has, and I hope there has been some evolution in my poems over the last 3 decades and a little longer. If there has been any evolution, it has been the result of some self-questioning that has gone on continuously, and that I think cherish as a part of my equipment. The minute I finish a sequence or a book, I think I come to a point where I say, all right, this was relevant to these questions. Now, the last thing I want is for this way of approaching language in a poem to be what I do for the rest of my life. So that's an immediate instinctive thing. Okay, there's nothing I can do about it. It's intuitive. But it's also the case that I try and remain open to my other practices. So there was a period when, for instance, very early on, where I was thinking through questions of how to respond in my poetry in the way that I would as a person responding to the visual arts. Visuality resists language. So when you're looking at a painting or a sculpture or an installation or even a film, you're called upon to bear witness to it in some other way. So there's a phase in my poetry where visuality dominates, or that way of responding to the visual dominates. But there was also a phase when I was thinking through very carefully about how the poem could be an artifact, could be a sort of machine of language. That was another preoccupation of mine much earlier on. But in these recent books, I think what I've really been most open to is music, my lifelong preoccupation with how time and momentum and sensuousness are elaborated in music. So I've had this long apprenticeship to music of various kinds. So that's something I thought I would just open myself up to. I think largely it's a series of openings up to different things. Also to the form in Jonavale, for instance, of the libretto. How do I get this polyphonic chorus of voices into a poem? How do I open up the short lyric? So these are some of the questions that inflect and inform inform my shifts of gear. But increasingly, I think in Hunch Prose, for instance, what you're pointing towards, the kind of open form, the renunciation of punctuation, for instance, a lot of that comes directly from my work in translation, whether that's Bhartrihari, who I've been working on for years and years, or more in Sanskrit, or Mir and Ghalib in Urdu, Maurice, for the last 10 years. You're jealous of people, who work in other languages, because sometimes the diaphaneity of their syntax, the things that they can do, those are effects that you can't necessarily do in your own language. Likewise, you can do things in your language which they might not be able to do. It's that intermediate gray zone of give and take, borrowing, stealing, copying, making things as an Urdu poet or a Sanskrit poet might. That to me is a great workshop in a laboratory where many things become real to me and they come into my practice. So I would say that to me, translation is a key activity, not only because I want to honor the poets I translate, but also because it really does something for my own poetry.
Great. So that itself now would lead us perhaps to this question, not really a question, but maybe a remark, that the construction of your poems, Ranjit, I very recently I saw some sort of a parallel. I read an essay by Carl Phillips, the American poet. The essay was called On Influence, where he talks about a poetry, of course, but he talks about a detective in the mystery writer Joseph Hanson's thrillers. And this detective, as all detectives, that's one of the things they have to do, is that he does not make his drinks, he builds them. And Carl Phillips says that this is such a lovely sort of metaphor, because he builds his drinks layer upon layer, liquid over ice, say tonic over gin, and then a garnish, and that is building of the drink. And similarly, he believes that poems are also built. And in fact, when one reads your work, Ranjit, what really struck me was you do not, as it were, expand and explain your thoughts. You just place various images next to each other, almost like the pointillist paintings of Georges Seurat, where he would just make his painting with dots of complementary colors and then form an image. Similarly, I feel you place these and it totally conveys an image of and in that context, this was just a remark. It was not a question, but in that
I love the idea of poetry as mixology.
Yes, but I was struck by, say, for example, your poem Gulf Nocturne, which has such beautiful images, and especially because I'm very fond of dogs, your image of the sea rushing up to grab the waves coming in to take a biscuit from your hands. Could you read that to us?
Sure, I will. And also to say that I love both those ideas, the building up of a drink, and I think poetry definitely does work like that, but also Seurat, and both are complex processes, because as you're building, you're also looking at how the different layers are responding to each other and bringing out other kinds of outcomes, as was Seurat doing, because his dots were not mechanically done. The complementaries work in a way that produces contour and volume and new colors. So yes, it's not just adjacency or juxtaposition. It's a calibration of how these images work with and against each other. So Gulf Nocturne, which is for my friend, the curator Abdallah Karoum, I was working on a project with him in Doha, which is where this poem came to be, literally. Looking at our sea here, the Arabian Sea from the other side. It was a wonderful experience. Gulf Nocturne for Abdullah Karum. A shoal of cresting neon drum beats furrows through the tide. The moon hovers above a vacant plastic chair that the ziggurat on the far shore will shove aside. The wind breaks down every veil and flag in sight. The sea shakes off its turquoise sleep and bounds foaming up the crumbling steps to snatch a biscuit from your hand. As waves, particles, words that flash and whirl around a darkened tower, in what crumpled atlas, what book of spells, how will they recall us? As scattershot signals, as shards of a sentence that broke under the planet it carried.
Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you.
Maybe we will also see if people want to ask questions. I would request people, even if they write it in the chat, we can read them out. If you have any questions, we'll be coming to that after this last point, which Ranjit, I wanted to ask you that in several poems, and I have not seen this in any of your earlier poetry, I see a sense of despair, a great sense of despair, of anguish. Just to name a few examples, and there are many more, there's Fury and Hawk, there's Train, and then there's Fire. Mm, of course, I would like you to speak on it, but I wouldn't like, this would be just a half sentence if I were not to add to it that even after all of these poems, there's a large majority of the poems where you impose faith in people, in humanity, and you speak of commandments to sing, to dance, and to this is, I think, the closing line of one of your poems, and to sing to us of the will to shape, never stop shaping. And that is such a beautiful, beautiful line. And then you write a poem like Market, which I would really like you to read, because that poem contains a prophecy that we desperately want that it should come true. So
Yes.
if you could read,
Sure.
speak on this aspect of.
And also let me respond to what you said about despair. I think there's an element of anxiety or pessimism that's been a current in my poetry always. But despair came through, I think, rather strongly. And I think it is our responsibility. We're talking about responsibility quite, we're being extremely responsible citizens here today, Anjali. So I think it is a responsibility to feel despair and at the same time to not abandon hope. And I think that as poets, particularly, we need to be able to call upon solidarities, which can be achieved not only through political action, which is very vital, but also by restoring all of these reserves of hope that we can as artists. So I'm going to read Market, and there's another poem that you actually mentioned. Can I read two? Okay, I'm going to read Market, which you asked for, and then I'll read the other one I'm thinking of. Market.
No, I said you could read three.
Oh, fabulous. All right, I'll read three then. I'm being greedy. Okay, let me start with Market. Market. Never forget the salt makers. They can trap the sea. Never forget the makers of flint knives. They can split the earth. Never forget the spice sellers. They can tempt the tongue to sing. Never forget the kite makers. They can scissor the wind into streamers, never forget the carpenters. They can build horses that breach walled cities, never forget those who stretch hide into leather. They can craft drums that bring down palaces. So that is the prophecy that you were referring to. And I'm going to read as my second poem in this set, Vernacular, a poem that I named with a great deal of deliberation because it refers to two, at least, of the disciplines that are closest to my heart. It is, for me, an absolutely negative word in language. It was a word used to insult the local and the regional languages, the Desha Bhashas, from the sovereign point of view of a standard language, and goes back to a Roman word, as we all know, meaning the language of the slaves, which I make some play with. So I reject that use of the term vernacular. But I uphold the use of the term vernacular in architecture, where it speaks of forms of architecture that are responsive to the site, to the resources of place, to the climatic factors. And generally there's a robustness because of this kind of responsiveness to the here and now and inherited skills. So this was a way of trying to see if I could bring these two approaches to vernacular together in this poem. Vernacular. A vernacular year it's been, its walls laterite, lime in its veins, its rammed earth floor embroidered with journeys across dunes and tides, its roof honeycombed with fables in which terracotta horses take wing and dive. It began with a tremble in water, clay and speckled loam, shadows flicked off the giddy wheel. From a line of light traced along the turning lip of an urn, beaded celadon flames marking the way home, we gathered ourselves. Sing to us months of passage in a language not of slaves. Sing to us of the will to shape, never stop shaping. And as my third, I'll read a poem called Fire. And I'm reading it because one of the key causes of despair in the year that I wrote this mainly in 2019, this book. One of the key shocks and causes of deep sadness for me, particularly for obvious reasons that you all know, was the brutal trifurcation of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir. Coming on top of decades and decades of the most brutal treatment, the worst oppression and insensitivity, what was done there was really an attempt to break whatever remained of the dignity of people, of a people and a place. And it set me thinking of the many, many, many instances and episodes of horror that have unfolded there since 1990. Which have affected people of all communities, all religions, all genders. What struck me forcefully was the memory of a little girl whose only fault was that she came out onto her balcony when there was a commotion in the street and was shot by a stray bullet. This happened a long time ago and I've never forgotten it. And it's at the heart of this poem, alongside other more recent horrors. Fire. I never once saw any blood gush out from that marble lion's mouth. Not when a boy fell at the barricades, blinded by buckshot, those faces pocked with metal seeds, those faces blurring in nailed eyes. Not when a girl falling on a balcony cried that flames had swallowed her heart. A fire engine drove right past, bells clanging.
How much more are we destined to see? Are there any questions? If nobody is asking questions, I will.
Go for it.
There were two, three things, in fact, I had kept in reserve, which I very much wanted to ask you. One was this thing, you do use words that are rarely used nowadays. And we do go to the dictionary and look them up and are surprised how aptly that word has been used. Really, that is very much one of the things I take away from your books. And then when one goes to the dictionary, there are words which are just not there. So
I made them up.
You made them up. Why? How?
That's part of my job description, as people tell you bluntly on occasion. But no, two things. One is, again, why are we being so responsible, Anjali? We're constantly harping on our responsibility as poets. Let me put it another way. I think one of the great delights of being a poet, of particularly a poet, but also other, of course, our fellow writers in other genres, naturally. But I think two things that I've always loved to do. One is to bring back into circulation words and expressions that have been sidelined, rendered archaic, been totally forgotten, for instance. I think that's part of what we do. We counter the kind of flattening and amnesia that afflicts us as users of language precisely by drawing on the word hoard. When I was much younger, that meant to me going right down to the roots of the language, where there was Old Norse and Anglo-Saxon. There was a period when I particularly used words or forms like the kenning, which really drew on that history of the language. More recently, it's simply reaching out to the other languages I read in and doing as they do. For instance, Paul Celan, the German poet, has for decades been my favorite poet, and I read both. He really doesn't write in German. He writes in Celanish, because that's what he does with his language. It reclaims it, reinvents it. And so to read him in German and then to read him in various translations, you're actually enriching yourself each time you read him. So whether it's that, whether it's the incredible linguistic skill of the poets in Hindi or in Urdu or in Sanskrit that I've been reading and who form part of my mental world, this is an important aspect of what we do, reaching back to the archive, to the word hoard, and bringing things back and inventing things because language needs to be renewed. And on some occasions, by the way, people felt that I'd invented a word when actually it does exist, like skewbald. I didn't make that up. That actually is available somewhere among those who love dogs and horses, but certainly in the dictionary and certainly in my poems. Yeah.
Well, yes, but what about a hunkahedron?
Hunkahedron.
Yes.
It just came to me, quite frankly, in a dream.
No, I'm just being
No, it was, where it appears, it's just
I know.
living with the many-sided noises of Bombay. I just one day said I need to name this phenomenon, and this is what I'm going to name it. It's a strange platonic solid with many, many, many sides, n+1 honk. So honkahedron. Yeah, there you go.
Now we know. On Bombay roads, it could be honkahedron.
It is honkahedron. It exactly is honkahedron. Yeah.
It is honkahedron.
Absolutely.
So a related question here, where Dion says, Ranjit, you may have been asked this 100 times by now, but could you tell us a bit about the book's intriguing title?
Oh, the title. Good grief. Taking a page out of Agha Shahid Ali's book, I should simply respond to everything by saying, it came to me in a dream. It actually didn't come to me in a dream. It came to me when I was thinking about what it means to be the practitioner of an art that is sometimes, I have said this before, but let me say it again. We occupy a really unstable space as poets, don't we? There have been periods, and even today, sometimes you're told that poetry is like the crown of the literary arts. A fat lot of good that does any of us, but that's a view. On the other hand, people quote the convenient part of the Auden poem, forgetting what he goes on to say, and say, oh, well, poetry makes nothing happen. As you know, the poem goes on to argue the reverse of that. But you're then told that, this is the age of nonfiction, and There are lots more readers for fiction, and good luck indeed to all of these fellow practitioners of ours. I in no way intend to be envious of them, not at all. We all we all benefit from reading various genres. But I just thought, let me play act this role in the title poem of a peevish poet, a peevish practitioner who says, how come I get left out of the sweepstakes because other forms make more pressing claims? What do I do with what resources I have available to me? And at the back of my mind was the figure of the bell ringer, Quasimodo, from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Someone who seems ill-favored and deformed and yet produces this incredible carillon, this beautiful overhead music from the cathedral that rings out across the city. Speaking for all poets. Yeah.
Just an aside, but when you spoke about it coming to you in a dream, I was reminded some years ago when a friend of mine was trying to sell his flat, and he was demanding almost double the market rate. And someone who wanted that house asked him, how can you ask? He said, no, I had a dream that I would get this price, and if I don't get it, I will not sell the house.
Fantastic. Always do what your dreams tell you to do.
So dreams are convenient sometimes. But there were two, there was one question from Manya Joshi, who will
Yes.
be with us tomorrow. Does the physical space where you live in influence your language, like the Bombay languages? And then don't you feel compelled to use these words in your poems?
Okay. Thank you, Manya. Thank you for that question. It depends. I would like to say that I am responsive to all of these languages that I translate from, and also the languages that I hear around me. But do they always come directly into my poetry? They do not. I think these are choices. I think for Arun Kolotkar and for Mustansar Dalvi, to name two noble confreres, I think that a representation of this language and the texture of their own poems is a crucial element, and I admire it in their work. For myself, it might take other forms. It might take the form of a turn of phrase or linguistic strategy. If I read through my poems, I can point out some of these as they occur. But by and large, it works osmotically for me. For instance, reading Mangesh Narayan Rao Kale's work, one of the books that I read, Mayavi-e-Tahrir, during the lockdown. Reading it was wonderful. It's this recognition of someone who is doing unto his language what I'm trying to do unto mine. And in his case, also with the political charge of bringing Perso-Arabic strongly into contemporary Marathi. So I respond to that in a certain way. I might, again, I was talking about Ceylon a little earlier. It's thinking through how these poets rework and recalibrate and reinvent their own languages, and how that might help me in some way. Also, if I have a brief moment, I just want to point out how, speaking of the Bombay languages, when I think back to my years at Elphinstone College, Anjali is also an Elphinstonian, the language departments that I learned the most from were Marathi and Gujarati, and I was never even enrolled with them as a student. The fact is that those faculties had practicing distinguished writers who were fully engaged with literary questions, who held multilingual readings. There was the example of their own writing. And so even if I didn't introduce any Marathi or Gujarati words into my poems, I'll always be grateful for what I learned from them, the worlds they made available. So I think the neighborhood of languages might work in different ways and might find different kinds of resonance in our work. Sorry, very, very long answer, Manya, but that's, thank you for the question and provoking me to say this.
It was a very, very useful answer. I think we have about 5 minutes more. There were two things I would like to close this session with. I'm sorry if we haven't replied to a few questions. Perhaps we might have another session at another time with Ranjit. But two things, if you could. One was, A lot of newer writers today might want to know what has been your writing practice up till now, in the sense of how, when, how much do you write every day, but also the writing of poetry. Is it amenable to having a fixed time to write, and or does it just come to you?
I mean, I do tend to write every day, even if that's just a stray line, a fragment, or if I go back and worry away at a fragment or a note from earlier. So some form of activity as a poet is part of my daily routine. I admire colleagues who, get up at the crack of dawn, welcome the first ray of light, and then sit and do their 2 hours of writing. And I wish I was that disciplined. I really do wish that. That only tends to work for me when I'm on residency somewhere, and I can, better organize my time in order to do this. So I make up for that by making sure that I don't lose contact with my riyaz or my sadhana. It is a daily practice of the art, no matter when it gets done or what aspect of it gets done. But certainly, yeah, every day.
Ranjit, we could listen to you for at least an hour more, but I will not tax you so much. So, and I very genuinely hope you will be back with us very soon at the Cappuccino Adda. And congratulations on this brilliant, brilliant book.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming and sharing such a lot of really what you have said is very important, and I'm so glad that this session is being recorded and it will be available even later for us to come back to. Many people have expressed great admiration in the chat for the way you have spoken. So on their behalf also, I would say thank you so much, Ranjit.
Thank you so much, Anjali, and I want to thank all of you who are present here. Thank you for your responses, and it's really been for me a very, very great pleasure, and to be continued. Yeah, truly grateful to have been featured in this festival. Thanks so much, Anjali.
Thank you, Ranjit. Fir milenge.
So take care.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, not bye. I'm going to stay on. There's a session after this.
Yes, there is.
Yes, I will. So I will vanish behind my screen and continue to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. Come. Okay, so I would like to invite our next session. In fact, I wish we could have short breaks before, because one has to seep in this session and then go on to the next. But time, as always, is not does not allow us to do that. 1 second, just Sarita, are you around, Sarita? Can you I would ask Sarita, Priya, Mrinalini, are you here? We are going to begin.
Hi.
Hi, Sarita. Hello. Welcome. Is Mrinalini there? No. Priya? Just give me 2 minutes. I'll check on where everyone else is. Ah. Okay, Priya's here. And
Yes.
yes. Hello, Priya. Welcome.
Hi. Can you see me?
No, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Then what shall I do?
Maybe your video is off. Just check.
It's checking.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
There you are. Okay. Hello, Priya. So I'll go to the.
Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Just a sec.
Sarita, could you turn on?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So only Mrinalini is not with us. Perhaps she'll be joining us soon. Today's session, our last session for today, is around this very, very significant anthology that Sarita has so painstakingly but beautifully brought out. Still We Sing. Now, it is Voices on the Violence Against Women. Yes, indeed, this book, which everyone should have because it's a very beautiful anthology. Congratulations, Sarita.
Thank you.
I would just like to say we are waiting for Mrinalini to join us, but is she there? No, she's not there. But before
You want me to call her?
yes, if you could, because I would like to make just two announcements. One is that Saima Afreen from Hyderabad was to join us. However, day before yesterday, she had a high fever and she tested positive for COVID, and she is quite unwell. So sending her good wishes to get well soon. Saima will not be able to
Hi, come on to the meeting.
with us today.
Come on.
And,
Yeah, we're already waiting for you.
and the second announcement I'd
Get
like,
on to
yeah, from the panelist link. Panelist link.
get to the panelist link. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go to the panelist link, which she has Anjali has sent you.
Zoom has
Got
sent.
it?
Yes.
Yeah, that email.
Yes.
The first link. You'll do it.
Yeah. Or come anyhow.
Great.
And
So
I'll
coming.
promote you to panelist. Are you there? Maybe in that.
Mrinalini?
No.
She's getting in
Okay, fine, fine.
with a lot of apologies.
No, no.
So
Okay. And secondly, Smita Sahay, who was to conduct this session, is also very, very unwell. She cannot move. She has some issues with her medical condition.
oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
So she just called half an hour, while we were starting this, today's festival. And so nevertheless, we shall soldier on, and I know that they are with us in rooting for this book. So I would start with introducing Sarita Jenamani, who's the editor of this book. Sarita is an Austria-based poet of Indian origin, a literary translator, anthologist, editor of a bilingual magazine for migrant literature, Words and Worlds, a human rights activist, a feminist, and general secretary of PEN International's Austria chapter. She has so far been published in 3 collections of poetry. English is the chief medium of her creative process. The other 2 languages she writes in are Odia, her mother tongue, and German. She has translated Rose, I hope I'm getting this pronunciation right, Auslander, a leading Austrian poet, and an anthology of contemporary Austrian poetry from German into Hindi and Odia, respectively. She has received many literary fellowships in Germany and Austria, including those from the prestigious organization Heinrich Boll Foundation. Uh, Welcome, Sarita, and we look forward to a really wonderful session with you, and we wish all success to this anthology.
Sorry to interrupt you, Anjali, but Mrinalini has joined as a non-panelist.
Okay, I'll make her a panelist. One second, please excuse me. Mrinalini, yes. Okay, Mrinalini, you will come in as a panelist soon. There you are. Please unmute yourself, Mrinalini, and start your video. Hi. Good to have you here. So, Mrinalini, just introducing, sadly, Saima and Smita will not be with us, but Mrinalini will be reading Saima's poetry out from the anthology. I just finished with the introduction, Mrinalini, of Sarita. Oh gosh, one sec. I welcome Priya Sarukkai Chabria, who is an award-winning poet, translator, writer of speculative fiction and nonfiction, and a very, very dear friend, which is also important to me. She's the founding editor of poetry at Sangam. Her new poetry collection. Today we announced Keki's new poetry collection, which is going to come out, and Priya's new collection, which is coming out next month. It is called Sing of Life, Revisioning Tagore's Gitanjali, and this will come out in May. It's coming out from Context of Amazon Westland. Welcome, Priya. Mrinalini.
Thank you.
Yes. Mrinalini is a Mumbai-based poet and writer. Mrinalini, your video has gone off. Please put it on. There you go. Mrinalini is a Mumbai-based poet and writer. Her poems have been published in several anthologies and literary journals. Her book of poems, Bombay in My Beat, was published in 2018. Welcome, Mrinalini.
Thank you.
So I take as my lot to conduct today's session. I begin, Sarita, with you. If you might tell us how this book came about, what you envisaged it as, and has it translated into the book that we hold in our hands today. Over to you, Sarita.
Thank you very much. First of all, Anjali, for this opportunity to showcase the book. I'm really thankful to all the contributor and all the senior writers who supported me from the very beginning, and all the new voices that enriched this book. Actually, it has all started with a symposium in 2019 that PEN Austria organized to commemorate the Day of Violence Against Women. And they have asked me to present a paper. So being a poet myself, I thought, why not I'm trying to present a paper on poetry and violence against women in South Asia. So that's what I was asked for. And when I started my research, I couldn't be able to find out a collection of poetry or a part of a collection where this issue was addressed. And I knew that I have friends who were very vocal about this, and they have written. but there was nothing available. I mean, we all know from Pinjar to When I Hit You of Meena Kandaswamy, there are wonderful novels and prose that are available. So I thought that why shouldn't I am going to do this? Because I thought that this is such an important issue needed to be addressed, and I knew that there is a lot of poetry scattering here and there. So I thought it was my responsibility somehow to put it all together. And that's how I come up with the idea, and I have started from the very beginning of 2020. And you all have you all were there with me from the very beginning, because I think violence against women or gender-based violence is not something you can define with a particular circumstances. Women are always punished to trespass the boundary set by patriarchy. And this instrument of victim bashing and silencing, it is such a terrible issue that I mean 40%, I mean, if we are going to statistics, 40% of women, they never report that they're harassed. So I thought this silence must be broken. And that was the main idea behind bringing out this book. And I'm happy that it's well accepted. And I have already translated this book into German. And I have chosen a human rights conference that is a very renowned human rights conference in Austria. To launch this German translation. And yes, so that's how I feel committed, because for me, if you are a bystander and you don't do anything, then you are also someone who is a culprit. You commit the crime in the same magnitude. So that's how.
That's lovely, Sarita. We'll want you to speak more about the book and your translations and your whole process of struggling to get it published. But before that, I would go to Priya. And we will, of course, also be reading poems, our own as well as someone else's from the book. But Priya, I would like to ask you this the question of violence against women, and how do you react to it, and does it reflect in your poetry? I mean, is it an underlying sort of a motive in your poems when they speak about women? Um, Generally, what are your views on this issue, Priya?
Well, it's so lovely being here. Thank you for this wonderful question, Anjali, and for your indomitable spirit, which is behind this poetry festival. And of course, Sarita, this is a wonderful book. I've been reading it. Congratulations. I just want to mention that, Smita Sahay had brought out an anthology of called Veils, Halos and Shackles, which was also, it was an international anthology on violence against women and empowering women. The slant was slightly different, but there were a lot of strong voices there. I wish Smita was here, and I hope she gets well soon. But it's not to detract from this beautiful book, which I have so enjoyed. And I've enjoyed particularly that you have a lot of translations from other languages and from neighboring voices of women from neighboring countries. But now to come to Anjali's question. Yes, of course. I mean, I think, first of all, I think there are very few women who don't feel harassed or in some way or the other in their lifetimes. I think all of us have faced it one way or the other, to lesser or greater degree. And of course, the strongest weapon is silence. The women, of course, keep silent very often, as Sarita pointed out, because of fear. And of course, the world outside, they also participate, some of them, unfortunately, in perpetrating the silence. And this is what we should also talk about. But there is the silence against speech, against sexual desire, silence against identities. You want to shut down the identities that women have into these little careful folds of mother, daughter, all ruled by patriarchy, and silencing the imagination. And by this, I mean silencing the imagination, not just the ability to invent ideas, but also very much to repossess or transform what you see around you. Okay? This is also a silence that we have, that women face. And my particular answer to this, specific answer to this is, yes, I do write poems about silencing women, but it would be more from, let me put it this way. Even now, we're the lucky ones. We're the ones who have speech and ability to express ourselves and write. What has happened? It has always troubled me. What has happened to the women of, down the centuries who wanted to express themselves? What about women's creativity? How could they express themselves? And they seem to have two ways, by and large. One was the courtesan, who could sing, dance, be very creative. Of course, the more creative she was, the more desired she was. And of course, at the same time, she was scorned. And the other was by being a nun, by swearing all pleasure. So you have these extremes, which is where I think, Anjali, your translation of Bahanibai Chowdhury's poems of domesticity and bhakti, which you brought out, is absolutely marvelous. It's significant, and we should hear more about this, because the women who sang at home, the women who, like Vanibai, sang at the grinding stone, at the water well, who sang threshing the grain, these are the voices that we have completely lost. These are the voices, these are the songs that were not thought worthwhile to record. And even Bahanibai Chowdhury's songs were reported by her son, else they would have been also passed into history, forgotten, lost. And this, I think, is utmost savagery, silence, and it should not be permitted. Therefore, when I write, I think I work with literary forms which were perhaps not allowed to women, or women were there very marginally, or men wrote in the voices of women. And it is these forms that I like to repossess, transform, make my own, and share. And therefore, I work with many earlier forms. I work with Sanskrit poetry. I mean, what shall I say? The great bard Kalidasa is a pet bugbear of mine. He wrote beautifully, but always the women, ever ready for pleasure, and always speaking Prakrit. This horrible slashing of the women's voices. So I will like to.
I think we are really having a true Adda, the four of us today.
Yes.
Because as you
yes, indeed.
As you point out, music and song, because as you say, silencing, Bainabai herself could not read or write. She just sang. Yes. So music, and I think the other thing is humor, because women and their proverbs their proverbs
Yes.
are so apt and cutting that it is a weapon for them. Humor is a weapon. But I interrupt. Priya, please go on.
Not at all. Not at all. Yes, of course, humor is one of those, I think, the best swords you can have to belittle with a laugh.
Yes.
And still, you could perhaps get away with it. And here, before I get into, could I have 2 minutes more,
More than that, we have
Anjali?
all the time in the world.
Okay. Then, I'd just like to talk about a very beautiful, one of my favorite figures from the North Indian painting and music traditions, who is the Abhisarika Nayaka, which you would be very familiar, I think all of us are familiar with, and you, Sarita, because of course Jayadeva, when he wrote the Gita Govinda,
Yes. Mm.
had Radha she's the ultimate Abhisarika Nayaka, the one who goes out in the night through the darkness to meet her beloved, right? And of course, we know in real life, if this happened, if a woman just sneaked out, you know what happens to most women. We shan't go into that. But there, Jayadeva took the Abhisarika Nayaka and he made her as Radha. She was older. She had a mother-in-law. She had a husband who would be sleeping near her, and she would still shush her hip girdle bells. She would shush her anklets and then, of course, go to meet Krishna. And I understand this layering of the divine on carnal desire, as it were, because otherwise, how do you contain these women, these horrible, horrible women who want to go out and do things by themselves? But for me, because I've stayed a long time with this Abhisarika Nayaka, this woman who walks out in the dark, she for me becomes the creative spirit. She for me is the woman who's wandering into the dark, not knowing what she's going to write, where she's heading, taking all the risks and going out to meet her beloved, which I would translate as meeting her creative self, as putting it out, being able to sing or paint, to express herself to her fullest. And also, if she wants, we are on, I was going to use a blasphemous word. Also, if she wants, take God as a lover. So, so this woman has,
That
I
should be
think,
the
is an
way.
important figure that we could work with.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon?
And that was Andal.
I'm
That should
sorry,
be
I
the
didn't
way.
get you. Ah, yes, Andal.
Yes.
Yes, Andal is, yes, Andal, this, who I've translated from Tamil, 8th century poet. She's very young, 15, when she wrote her tremendously erotic and sacred verses, because she didn't care a jot for what anyone said. And there are very few of these women who don't care and will take the consequences. So, my very short poem, which I will read today, I dedicate to all the women whose voices have been lost. All those women, may we hear their songs, may we be supported, and maybe from now on, support these women who don't have opportunities that we do to sing.
Thank you. Thank you.
This
We'll be reading a little. I mean, after Mrinalini.
later, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I come to Mrinalini now. Mrinalini, we'd like to ask you what constitutes violence against women in your thought, and do you think certain forms of violence are culture specific or geographically specific, or are they universal? And how does this reflect in your writing? Over to you, Mrinalini.
Um, what is violence against women is um, it's a very simple question and a very complex question. with simple and complex answers. Anywhere where, I mean, I don't profess to be able to answer this question. We're all trying to figure it out. I just think that anywhere that there's a woman is discriminated against based on her gender is a tiny cut, or it can be a very, it can take her life. So and that's the range, and they're all violence. There's I mean, it begins with words, right? Like we are all we like to examine ourselves through our words, and the biggest like it's in our language. It's just there. I don't have to say the words. Should I? I shouldn't, right? Like I don't want to give them any energy, but there's so many words against women, and they are considered. There's a certain weakness attributed to them. Violence comes with words. So what considers violence is complicated in the sense that it's everything. It's words, deeds, thoughts, actions. It's everything. And very simply, it's also when everything culminates into some sort of physical life-threatening situation. I mean, I think that because in India there's so much that we read about in the papers. I think, what is it that we're not reading about? There's just we're just getting a handful in the news that have made it. And then I ask myself also, why is it? I mean, it's a form of privilege to be given this platform. So there's this guilt also with being given this platform. Still we sing. Thank you, Sarita. I basically, my reactions are to what happened to other women. But we've all faced violence, as you said, Anjali. Like, you walk on the street and you're being undressed by someone's eyes already. But yeah, it hasn't led to anything as drastic as what we have read about, like the Hathras case or the Delhi gang rape on the bus. This is a very long answer to that question, but I have a thought about it, and I think that men cannot be separated from this sort of this equation. It's true, but it's constant. It's very important to keep in touch with what the women are thinking, of all classes and at all levels of like wealth. This is what we have been hearing from people. I'll just three quotes. Such crimes hardly take place in Bharat, but they occur frequently in India. Go to villages, no gang rapes or sex crimes there. They are prevalent in urban areas. This is an RSS chief, a person who has a position of privilege. He's a man. So there's already like a mindset of Bharat in India. And this is very local. This is not something that will be thought about in America. However, even though we have local issues like this, Bharat versus India, urban versus rural, high caste, low caste, it's still ultimately about it's one gender overpowering another. There is also another quote. She should have called the culprits brothers and begged before them to stop. This could have saved her dignity and life. Can one hand clap? I don't think so. This is a God man, someone who is professing to talk about the spirit to hordes of people who follow him.
Who he is.
We all know who he is, and we all know what he's talking about. And that is his reaction, and that is the attitude. And it's not okay. And we have to keep talking about this. We have to keep bringing it up, because as much as it's there and it's prevalent and we can feel frustrated about it, it has to go down. And luckily, there was one case of an ex-CBI director who made who made a comment when he was talking about gambling, and he made a comment about, well, if we're going to be raped, then at least we can enjoy it. So this is a positive case where a lot of women said something and they were outraged, and they weren't necessarily from the grassroots, or they weren't necessarily, or from the city. It wasn't about that. It was about the fact that why is this man who is in a position of power in India normalizing such a comment, such an idea, to talk about the financial wealth of the country. But that was a positive case. Another one: harm can come on a person if the stars are in adverse positions. We have no answer to this. Only an astrologer can predict. This was a home minister of one of our states. And so again, it's given divine attribution, and so jo ho gaya, so ho gaya. All men, all of these quotes. And so then there's the question. May I keep going? Please let me know if I need to stop.
No, you could go on.
I'll just wrap up. There's this book out, Why Men Rape, an undercover study. It was, let me see if I can, it was a book, and it was, well, anyway. Why Men Rape is a book that's recently come out. And it was this woman who, she investigated 9 men across the spectrum. And these are the results. Because they can. They physically can. Because Tara Kaushal, yes, thank you, Aishwarya. Because she deserves it. They were having fun. These are abbreviated. She's explained all of this. Masculinity as a cult and a power assertion, something you can tell the lads at the end of the day. And mostly because they can get away with it. Usually they offer examples of what she was wearing, what was she doing at night, looseness of character. But it's kind of systemic because of these reasons. And, unless, women have to talk about it, but men have to join this conversation amongst themselves. And we have like an organization like, the most famous MARD, Men Against Rape and Discrimination. Farhan Akhtar started it or something. It's not enough. I feel like we need a lot more. All I can say in my poetry is how systemic it is, and that's how I view it. I wish more men could be part of this conversation. If I was to have a voice for an opinion, that's what I would say. Thank you, Anjali, for letting me say that.
Thanks, Mrinalini. In fact, I'm so it was a very large question, and you took it and answered quite succinctly. Thanks, Mrinalini. What I would like to say in a very short, that these are extreme cases. They happen by and large, and it's mainly the one, I don't know if it's in the book, I'm sorry, I haven't read it, but one of the reasons that men can indulge in this kind of violence is because it is inbuilt in women in our society that if such an incident happens, she has to feel shame. She has to feel shame to talk about it or say that she was subject to it. And this is especially true in cases of domestic violence. But I think we should come back to the book and to poetry. So in this round, I would like to invite everyone here to read their poem from this anthology, and very briefly to speak about what has been the thought or the feeling behind the poem and the way it got written. So could we start with, because that's how we are going, so could we start with you, Sarita?
Sure. Um, I have two poems in this book. Um, the first one I have in the first one I have addressed this silencing, this methodology of silencing. When we have discussed a lot right now. I mean, I would take from Priya. She gave us so many examples of ancient India where women are so powerful. Actually, yes, it is not blasphemous, Priya. We can go on and have God as our lovers. And then the God would say, as he said in Gita Govinda, Dehi Pada Pallava Mudaram. So just give your feet on my hand. So that's how it was described. Akamha Devi, she was also such a powerful poet, and Lal Dev and Mirabai too. But this is the instrument of patriarchy, this victim bashing and silencing. And I don't know why. I mean, when I edited this book, I thought that I would do that as South Asian voices. That's why, because at least India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, they have the same heritage. And from the very big these three countries, the women were the sufferers during the partition, and it is still going on. And when you see during this era, since 2014, we are going back to a new dark age. and so for I would like to, and there is so many contradictions, because on one hand we are just saying that so much is taking care of the women there. We are plagued by the Devi syndromes, and at the same time, when you go to Vrindavan, you see the precarious condition of the women there. So that was my second poem that is in the book. But I will read you to all my first poem. It is about silence and women and other songs. Don't ask them. Don't ask them about the scars on their bodies. They lick their scars in silent afternoons. In the same elegant way, they plait their hair after an unwilling act of lovemaking. Don't ask them about the scar on their body. They lick their scars in silent afternoons. In the same elegant way, they plait their hair after an unwilling act of lovemaking. In them, sometimes a cremation ground incinerates, sometimes suicidal tulsi plant breath its last. Science that seems to be alive through the vital language that names them. Do not ask them for the traces of their tongues, their thought. The best part of their sentences is silence. They know how to sweep out their voices from their yards day in, day out. They master the ability to distill the hunch of existence. They mute their scars with their silenced love songs. That's it.
Beautiful, beautiful, Sarita.
Thank you.
Priya,
You want me to read another one? Or-
we'll go in a round.
Yes,
Let everyone
yes.
read. Yeah, thanks. Priya, I would ask you to unmute yourself and please read your poem.
Right. Before I read, just one point. I think, Sarita, you were talking about when Krishna says, you can put your, I place my head on your feet.
Yes.
From the Gita Govinda, right? Now, first of all, let me just, if you don't mind, Anjali, just to put the concepts in place. The Ashtanayikas are very commonly used in Sanskrit poetics, in painting and music, but they were first really written about in the 16th century by Kesavadasa, and these described 8 types of women in love. The Abhisarika, as I said, is the one who goes out. The one to who the lover or the god says, yes, I place my feet, even a lover, huh? I place my head at your feet. When does that happen? In two cases. One, after lovemaking, very happy, yes, I will place my head at your feet. Second, after the process of being unfaithful, the Khandita Naika, she's angry. She removes her jewels because he's gone away with someone else. And then the reconciliation, then he says, please accept me. I place my head at your feet, right? So it's not a kind of a large, it has a narrative, is what I'm saying. I wish it was a little more free-flowing and free-floating in that sense, but this is the story behind it, which doesn't mean that it isn't beautiful. Many of these forms, and I go to them also for the beauty. It's a beauty of the forms that attracts me, and then I see everything else. And now, for example, the poem that I'll be reading is drawn from 2nd century BCE to about 4th century CE, Tamar Sangam poetics, love poems. And these are, there were some women writing it. There were also men writing in the voices of women. It was written, remember, Tamar is a very old language, the oldest in the subcontinent, written language. And these were, there's a tremendous beauty there because outer geographies are meshed with inner landscapes of love. This is the beauty of Sangam. So here's my poem. It's called Dialogue 1. And you will see, though I didn't have it in mind, there's another, may I make one more point, please, Anjali? You know, I don't think you need to have all this in your mind when you write it. There is a general intent that you live with. And I think that is what gets expressed. So this poem comes out, I think, as against silencing the body of language, against silencing sexual passion. This is the overheard poem. When the woman says to her lover, I'll tell you this in advance. You who will be enclosed in my flesh, your rhythm's mine, our hands like 1,000 comets descending towards pleasure, your sweat becoming my skin. Listen, all this I want and more. Yet, in your passion, do not scar me. Do not split my lip, nor stifle speech. Do not force my cervix out of shape, nor ram my individuality. I am parched, driven by longing, caked by the long dust of denial. Yet I'll come to you like the first rain, fragrant and trusting. Thank you.
Beautiful, Priya, beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrinalini, would you read your poem and tell us briefly what prompted you to write it?
Very hard to follow, Priya, but and that was really beautiful with all the references, the literary references and the classics. I actually started writing this poem because I was taken with a word. The rape seed is actually a seed, and it's in the mustard family, and it's a major crop in many of the nations of the world. You know, the seed is very rich in oil, and the grains are actually eaten. And the name of that plant is derived from a Latin word called rapum, which means turnip. But in the other sense of the word, it's derived from rapere, which means to take by force. And both date to around the 15th century. So I was, it's interesting. So when I wrote this poem, but then I started, as I was reading up on the rapeseed, I found a few interesting facts and thoughts that I wanted to play with in the poem. So there's a toxic substance in it, in the rapeseed, called erucic acid, which has serious side effects and especially heart damage. So because of this, it's actually now all over the world, it's genetically modified to suit human beings. And it's very heavily reliant on pesticides. So it actually devastates the soil and the environment. Um, and so here's the poem, Rapeseed Farm. He inherited it from his father, the white blindness of his knuckle on ladybird wings, the angle of his scythe against her jawbone. Their agriculture was barbed in with her silence. Homeschooled in theory, not all seeds are genetically modified. He'd go on game with the lads, ripping the shanks of their sport. They sowed terrified fields with their loin fire and watered the land with her unsuspecting rust fruit. They extracted a lifeless vegetable from her golden oils when they bloomed in turns and left her there with broken petals in her hair. She was all the mysteries to be contained in the dirt, the sole grounds for his plough. He would bequeath it to his boy, the ways to soil the sickle and break the earth. Thank you.
Very, very touching, Mrinalini.
Just a quick point about that. I guess it goes back to the way I've been thinking about how violence is it starts at home. It starts it's even like handed down from father to son. So and that's something that we do need to talk about a lot more, and probably yeah, I don't know what this poem can do for that, but that's how it came out.
Well, we do need to talk more about it, and one of the ways is what Sarita has done by bringing out this book and perhaps allowing us to voice concerns which are ours individually, but also which we feel we share with women around the world. So I'm sorry, Smita is not here, so I will have to invite myself to read my poem from this anthology. And this poem is called, it's a prose poem. It's called Warren. Warren are the holes that rabbits dig underground. And the concept behind it is, of course, that we need, as women, to build warrens where we can connect with each other. So, Warren. This morning I noticed there was a tunnel that runs from my house to yours. My desires, discarded every night as worthless as used condoms on the brothel floor, lay heaped against the wall in a corner, hiding the cavity so expertly, like a magician who shoots an arrow and it flies in the opposite direction, seeking vengeance from a day filled with monotony, looking for escape, for it churns a hunger as turgid as the seeds in the earth when girls become women and women become girls while the river flows, oblivious to the light that falls on its waves, wanting them to rise and birth 100 sons. Yet the earth births a daughter who will stay close to her side and share her ache, since the black soil is wet with humus and sweet is the smell of decomposition that leaves a skeletal filigree behind, as delicate as she has been, but eventually they are only bones. For the flesh has disappeared, some torn away by hyenas who must feed their passions, and the rest given willingly in bargain for pleasure, for duty, or buying peace and respite from a thirst that will never be quenched, even by 1,000 rivers, a thirst that rises from the depths of desperation and fear, that rises from deprivation and the dread that she will be cast out with such a weak hand against an opponent who holds all the trumps. And yet she lifts the mass in that dark, forgotten corner where she discovers a tunnel that she can pass through to reach your home from mine, that each home has a tunnel we can join up, an endless catacomb, a subterranean network, if only we uncovered that heap lying discarded in the dank and dusty corners we were so afraid to look at. Thank you.
Lovely,
So
lovely, lovely.
that we don't have too much time now left. So could I do a last round of readings of poems other than ours from the book? Sarita, is that okay? Mm,
Sure.
yeah, great.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but I thought I could do Saima's before we do
Yes.
this.
Oh, you would read Saima's and then one more? You would like to read?
If we have the time.
See, read Saima's in this round.
Okay.
And if we have the time, then you could read
Okay.
one more, perhaps. Okay, thanks. Sarita, I start with you again. Would you like to read a poem?
Yes. First of all, Priya just told that I have a lot of translations here, and it is the time to thank not only to the publisher of the Holy Book, Mr. Manu Das, because you all know that I had to left one publisher, and I wanted it to publish the book so urgently. I requested him, and without a second thought, when he listened to this idea, he accepted my project. First of all, thanks to him. Secondly, I would thank to Aftab Hussain, who is my co-editor in the magazine that I edit here from here. And when he, because when I left the project, I had only 50 poems with me. And Mr. Manudash asked me what you are going to do with it, because these are not many. I mean, you will have a very small book. So I asked around the friends, and the offer, the help that I got, I'm overwhelmed by it. After Hussain, he collected all the poems from Pakistan. He connected me to the writer. He translated a lot of poems from Urdu. And Professor Charan Rudramurthy, he connected me to the Sri Lankan authors, and that's how this lovely book come up. And we have a lot of nuances, because before you ask that if it is culturally, the violence against women has something to do with culture. Yes, of course, because if you go through the poems here, you will find out the Indian writers, most of the time, they have addressed the question. Right now they have addressed a lot of issue of rape and all that going on, and the junta of silencing. And whereas the Pakistani poets, they always refer to the religious point of view. The Sri Lankans authors, they have written the impact of war on them. And and the Bangladeshi writers, they are, I don't know, they are too scared. Their poetry is so I mean, it is symbols. So today I'm going to read you the poem of Sara Sagufta. She is a very renowned poet from Pakistan. She is already dead, and Amrita Pritam, she wrote a play on her, Ek Thi Sara. And the poem I'm reading is called Women and Salt, translated from Urdu by Aftab Hussain. There are different of honors, a veil, a slap, and wheat. The nails of imprisonment are hammered into the coffin of honor. From house to footpath, nothing belongs to us. Honor is just how we pass our life. Honor is the spear they branded us with. Our tongues are tied with honor. If salt of our bodies is tasted one night, we are considered for a whole life as tasteless bread. What a weird market is this. What Dyer himself is discolored. The flying kites are dying on the palm of space. I deliver babies in a state of incarcerations. The earth should be playful for a legitimate child. Because you bear children in fear, today you have no lineage. You are known by one organ of your body. The gait, your manners define your status, a bewitching gait. A false smile that has been plastered upon your lips for centuries you didn't weep. Are you a real mother? Why have your children turned pale? If you are a mother, real, which family do you belong to? Of rape? Of an imprisonment? Or of a divided body? Or of your daughter bricked up alive? In market, your daughters need hunger, with which they drink their own blood and eat their own flesh. Which of your eyes are these? How many times was the wall of your house bricked up? You put my introduction in my smile, but named your son as current coin. Today, your daughter kills her own daughters. I shall brand my daughter's tongue in the blood-spitting woman is not a metal. Now she looks for a bangle to steal. A battleground is my courage, my desire, a burning coal. We were born with shrouds around our heads, not with rings in our fingers that you can steal. Thank you.
That's Sarita. That was very, very moving. Thank you. And
Yes.
you read it so well.
Thank you.
I go to Priya now. Priya, would you like to read a poem?
Yes, I'm going to be reading Keki by Devaratri Mitra, translated from the Bengali by Sanjukta Dasgupta. Lyrical and violent. But I won't say more. Let's read it. Who, why, when, no one knows. On the seashore, waist deep in sand, the girl Kiki of Jade House was found in the far north near the waterline. Long hair and lapping waves have covered her body partly. Salty caress of the sea has washed away the streaming blood. Black bruise like fish bile on the throat. A bit of tongue sticks out as if a cuckoo's deformed voice. On her thighs, not men's caresses, faint sores from cigarette burns, but her lidless, shark-nibbled eye holes still dream. Feet on sandbed, the sea pillows her head. Rippling brain sing along with the waves. Everything's almost all right. Only in secret tonight, not roasted chicken. Kiki's little finger on her stepfather's dinner table was served in silverware. Yeah.
That was such a really shocking.
Oh, gut-wrench.
Absolutely. I invite Mrinalini now. Thanks, Priya.
Um, so this is Saima's words about her poem. She says, it's about how Eve was considered responsible for Adam's fall in Eden, and how this continues across different timelines and geographical locations. A woman tries to seek help from the last prophet, and whether she gets it or not is unclear. And the poem is entitled, Are You the One Who Sobbed in Shahid's Arms? By Saima Afreen. My forehead permanently shone, for kissing 5 times the floor stone. I was born a prophecy, an ultimatum of sins, in contours of an apple and Eve. Naked leaves were her sanatorium, mine too. With each sunset, my slavery renews. Slavery to dark fruits, owl hoots, silver nights, candle days, adding layers to my shadow. A silhouette that was thrown from Eden to Lanka to Jeddah. Still wandering in its skin, in towns, rivers, wells, and the wilds, howling, shrieking, wailing, to hold 2 feet of earth that slips and promises, to wring her rib cage on resurrection for not covering her bust that was full of wild blooms. The mirror shows her the depth of mud dug 2 yards deep. It couldn't show her those eyes that dropped diamonds on mornings stretched with the breeze eating her fingers that rise with minarets. Prayers break into beads, streaming into starlight that measures the depths of her last year. Her body was a clay lamp. She lit it up, wanted to burn that the fire is from hell, your body is not yours. Scriptures opened another book in her iris. They didn't tell her about war brothels, maps pulsating with bombs, the terror of black and white. Yet there is a promise of peace in afterlife. The eternal joys, grapes the size of pitchers, the pearl palaces too clean, too pure for her grubby chipped nails fingers. She stains her body with light, tears her skin. The holy text falls like lorem ipsum between columns. She pastes herself in spaces between beheaded crowns and mumbles, Dear Prophet, after you no one will come. Then who sobs in my arms? It's a beautiful, sophisticated poem.
Thanks, Mrinalini. I wish we could have gaps between sessions, between poems, but time just flows through our fingers. I would like to read a poem called Kites by Menka Shivdasani, whose poetry, especially her poems about women, I greatly admire. Admire because there is always a reflection of the structures that control women. But in Menka's poems, say like perhaps she has a poem which is not in this anthology called The Woman Who Speaks to Milk Pots, and which I just simply love. And another poem, I miss the title, but it's about this woman breaking out with her wings spread out as a giant monster who's going to destroy you. So there is this strong element in Menka's poems, which is evident in this one too. It's called Kites. Kites are flimsy, fragile, decorative, paper thin, bearing their wooden cross, biding their time in airless drawers, hidden away from the sky. Kites are nasty, like women, Sharp-edged, they fly against the clouds, bite into your hands. The threads they bear have hidden shards of glass, unfurling as they gauge the weft of wind. You who stand on the parapet edge believing you hold the strings, look up where it hovers and rustles. Kites are nasty, they soar, they tug against the reins, catch the nearest squall and disappear. You will only be left with a stinging hand and an empty space above. Great, Menka, great. I love this poem of yours.
We love it. I mean, when I translated it with my co-translator into German, he says, "This is the point she has put up. Kites are like women." This was lovely.
Very, very nice. In fact, I think Menka's here. Thanks, Menka, for this very, very wonderful poem. Now, in fact, we have passed our time, but a quick last parting words for today, because I'm sure we'll be together again at some point. So, Sarita, thank you very, very much for bringing out this and for amplifying our voice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And would you say a final bye-bye to us for tonight?
Me?
Oh, yes. Everyone is going to have 2 minutes or 1 minute to talk and say bye-bye.
Yes, I'm really thankful to all my contributor, to all the writers who have contributed here, to who has translated the poems, who have helped me to collect. It's my gratitude, and I'm very happy that you have invited here to showcase this book, and I hope this should be the beginning of breaking this silence. And I think we should stand in solidarity with each other, because you cannot, I mean, literature is always have a political motive, and I think it should help us to open up, to speak up, and to stand with solidarity with each other. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Priya. Ranjit, you are saying, why do you write in the chat? Yeah. Why don't you speak? Just unmute yourself and speak.
Please don't be subject to the autocorrect then. No. I didn't want to say anything after this session. You were all absolutely marvelous. So no, just to thank you all, really.
Thank you.
It was really a
for being there till the end. Priya.
Really, just to say thank you again. Thank you for this book. And thank you, Anjali, for hosting it, and the lovely poems that we heard today. Really marvelous. And I look forward to to many more meetings.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mrinalini.
And one more line. Yes, please. Hope Smita and Saima get well soon.
Indeed, indeed. All our wishes to both of them.
Yes.
Yes. Mrinalini.
Yeah.
I'm just grateful to be here to see all of you. And thank you, Sarita. This is it isn't just being part of the anthology, it's being able to speak like this. That's really brought it home for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrinalini.
Anjali, for creating this platform for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. This platform exists because you come and read and speak, and the audience comes to listen. And I hope the Adda never stops. Even if the Cappuccino Adda stops, I hope some Adda or the other always goes on. Thank you for coming. Please join us tomorrow at 5 o'clock. From 5 to 8, we are having a lineup of very, very beautiful sessions. Goodbye, everyone. Keep well and good
Bye.
night. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.